Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast with your hosts Brian Oughton and Chad Gross. Join us for conversations and interviews on the topics of apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
Do you want some coffee, Mr. Tully?
Do I?
Yes, have some.
Yes, have some.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Chad Gross, as always. How are you doing this week, Chad?
Excellent. Had a great week. Been looking forward to, we didn't record last week, so I'm excited to be back and recording. I definitely missed it.
Yeah, this is actually recording on a Saturday, Easter weekend, and everyone here in Northern Ireland had been telling me that it was going to snow and freeze this weekend, and today it was like hot summer day. We're out planting strawberries and mowing the grass and yard work kind of stuff.
The things you do in the Shire with other hobbits.
Yeah,
right?
We're just working on Bag End.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. Well, it's kind of funny because yesterday here in Maryland, we had a odd day where it was cold, it was windy, and we had 3 or 4 episodes of like this little hail that just was coming down and just nailing everybody. So we kind of had the opposite kind of weather than you did in the Shire.
Yeah.
I must be in like Mordor or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I know everybody, if I keep calling it the Shire, I always call it the Shire because I'm like, right when we were moving was when like the Lord of the Rings was out and like very popular. So I always just thought, if you come to Northern Ireland, it's so green. Everything's so green. Anybody who's a guest is like, it's so green. You fly over, it's like a patchwork quilt of green, different greens, and sprinkling of sheep everywhere as well. But yeah, if I keep calling it the Shire, everybody think I'm in New Zealand or something. But anyway, it's just because it's really green and Irish and, well, whatever.
That's my wife's dream vacation, by the way. She wants to go to New Zealand and visit the sets of Lord of the Rings because she's a big Tolkien fan.
What you can do, Chad, you can be like, when you go to the airport and you get on the plane and she's like, wait a minute, this was a short flight. Yeah, we're going to the Shire, like you said. And you actually just show up on my doorstep and
That's a great idea. I'm gonna use that.
Good. Well, speaking of interesting places in the globe, we have a special guest today coming to us. He's from India, as I understand it, but he's coming to us from the UAE, which is the United Arab Emirates. So I don't know how that works in that part of the world and how close those are without looking at the map because I'm that ignorant. I might know a little bit more than some people. Hey, we get a lot of shipping containers from India where with my work. And so I'm talking to India quite a bit already, but I'm really happy to have with us today Jacob Varghese from the SAFT Apologetics ministry. It also has a podcast connected with it, which I want to point people to, but we'll talk all about those resources. Jacob, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Brian, it's a true delight to be with you and also with Chad. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Well, me and you've been in contact for a little while now, and really love to see the work you're doing, in particular the podcast. You also do a lot of interviews of apologists and stuff, and so awesome work. So we want to kind of find out more about what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about, your background, a bit about yourself, where you're from, where you're living now.
Well, originally I am from India. I know that there's a place to explore a joke there. Where you're from originally, that sort of thing. For you guys to explore.
Hey, nice. Wow, this is the first guest, Brian, that has quoted Ghostbusters. Not only did he quote Ghostbusters, but he did it right out of the gate. Wow.
That's amazing.
Shoo.
I
need a moment.
I wish I had like a crunch bar to hand him and say, you've earned this.
You've earned this.
So
nice.
So like Brian said, I'm right now in UAE, but people might immediately find out the name Dubai to be much more familiar.
Yeah.
Dubai is like one of the Emirates, or as we would say it in India or US, one of the state in UAE. My parents, they've been working here. My dad's been here for about like 25 years.
Uh-huh.
I was born and brought up here, and I did my schooling here in UAE, and then just did my 3 years of bachelor's in economics in Calcutta, where Mother Teresa did her work, and William Carey came and set up Sarampur. So that's in the northeastern part. But we are all from Kerala, which is the southern state, also known as God's own country. Famous for its backwaters and spicy dishes. So that's sort of my nativity there. And like Brian said, I'm leading a ministry called SAFT Apologetics. We are a web-based ministry. We have a podcast. So work has been going well. Like I said, I just did my bachelor's in economics, so I'm looking forward to pursuing my future into economics. And at the same time, as the Lord leads, to continue to equip and expand His work wherever He placed me.
Yeah, well, excellent. I think of Dubai, and I'm just imagining like you can look out your window and there's these dudes flying around with jetpacks, or Tom Cruise is running up and down a building, and they're filming it or something. I don't know if you've ever seen. Is it? How is Dubai? It is. Seems to be quite an amazing place.
Recently Will Smith just landed in Dubai as part of the Dubai Expo. We just heard that Lionel Messi is also going to land. So this is definitely the place of all hi-fi. But the interesting thing about what people think about UAE is what we would think about the US. So when we think US, we are looking like New York, skyscrapers, all rich stuff. And then you travel around New York and you see suburban districts where people are homeless, and you're like, what? People are homeless in the US? That's the same thing that is there in UAE. People think Dubai, they think downtown Dubai, huge skyscrapers. But there are different parts of UAE. So I'm in another emirate called Ajman, which is, comparatively, it's very developed to other countries, just this emirate. But it's not hi-fi or Porsche or, like jetpacks and Tom Cruise. But it's like with every nation, it's a mixture. We've got both sides of the plate. We've got bachelors living in small villas in underdeveloped parts, not too much sanitation going on. So UAE too has its fair share of luxury and poor end on our plate. So people coming to visit normally don't get to see the other end. They just see the downtown Dubai. But just like in the US, we also have both ends.
Yeah. Jacob, just as a side note, could you take off those Gucci sunglasses? I can't see you very well. And plus the
glare
from the skyscraper, and the water fountains behind you is kind of distracting. So
I'm glad you said that, Brian. I mean, I didn't want to draw attention to it, but you guys know each other, so I'm glad that you did. So, Jacob, so SAFT stands for Seeking Answers, Finding Truth.
Yeah.
So how did you, it's always interesting to hear from other believers how they became interested in the discipline of apologetics, because there are plenty of Christians that they still think it means that you're apologizing to somebody.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's similar over there in India after listening to some of your podcasts. But how did you personally become involved in kind of giving a rational defense for the faith, or, what we traditionally call apologetics?
So I was exposed to the field of apologetics at a very young age. And by that, I mean, not like I read books, or I'm not like now a life level kid apologist or anything of that sort. But there have been some very prominent pioneering apologists in Kerala, like from long back. So we're looking at around like 50 years ago, there were people who were doing apologetics work, but they were not primarily oriented towards in a philosophical, deeply theological sense. They were more like Christianity, Islam, because worldview level apologetics. That's what predominantly that has been here. So we have a family friend. He's a pastor. I think he should be over 70 years now, and so he is one of the pioneering apologists here in Kerala. And so this is a guy who has who gives lectures. Sort of like, you can say, sort of like a mixture of Sean McDowell and like Lee Strobel. So he can captivate the audience with his words, but also someone who digs in really hard and does research and gives talks to India's scientific community, the ISRO, and leaves them spellbound saying, wow, we didn't know about this stuff. So he is a very close friend of my dad. It's through him that my dad came to faith. So he would come and he would talk to my parents, and he would give them class on doctrines, on Revelation, on Genesis. And it's through him that I was, looking back, it's through him that I was first exposed to OEC. And even to my parents also, it was like, mind-blowing stuff. So I had an idea about what apologetics is. He would do debates, and my parents would sit and watch his debates, defending Bible, Jesus' identities, divinity, and all of that. So I had an idea, but I didn't know that that was apologetics or what apologetics was all about until I went to do my bachelor's in Calcutta. And so at that time, when I went to do my bachelor's, I was in a brand new place, brand new culture, brand new language. Everything was brand new, and I was all alone in this white state. I just built up some contacts when we landed there with the church through some connections of pastors. But I was also staying in my college accommodation, so it's like very far away from the church. So I was completely isolated. And so my spiritual mentor, who is also on the board of our advisory board of SAFT Apologetics, Jern Thomas, so he suggested to me, you have a lot of time on your hand. You're also in a very non-Christian secular environment, unlike I was here, surrounded by family, church, youth groups. So he said, you know what, I think you should take a look at some books. I'll recommend some books to you. This is a field that we call apologetics. You can take a look at the books called The Case for Christ, More Than a Carpenter. These have been phenomenal, ground level changing, world revolutionizing sort of books. So my church pastor too was very encouraging. So he also has some books. And so I started digging into it, and I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. This is pretty epic. I never knew that this sort of contents were there. And that was my introduction to apologetics. And that happened around like close to 4 years ago. And so I can say that was where I was properly introduced what apologetics was, what the stream is, how does dialogue normally happen there, what are the topics that we would discuss or we would engage with there. So I could say that, so briefly, that was my introduction to apologetics.
So it was kind of a combination of your parents and the influence your parents had, but then also this pastor, right? That's kind of a mentor. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. So pastors that are listening, do you see the impact you can have when you are involved and are aware of apologetics? Jacob is evidence of that. Here he is being a leader of a ministry that's doing some great work that we're going to hear about. So don't underestimate what you're doing.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how SAFT got started. Is there any story behind the name in that regard?
So you guys might immediately find the similarity between seeking answers, finding truth, and seeking Allah, finding Jesus. So Nabil Qureshi's biography was a big inspiration to me. So because we have seen in India, we have heard numerous tales of Christians who would come to faith, and in India, the hostility towards a Christian can come within other Christian brethren of other denominations. So we're talking about like what we would see in John Wesley translating the Bible and facing persecutions from the Roman Catholic Church. That sort of a thing is, not like burning to the stake, but that sort of a hostility from family is quite prevalent in India, especially in South India. So my parents, when they stepped out of another denomination and became Pentecostals, they too faced that hostility from family. So we have seen people standing for their faith, encountering the truth, and saying, hey, if this means I'm going to be isolated from my family, if this means I'm going to be threatened and ostracized from my society, I'm still going to stand by it. And so I could immediately connect with what Nabil Qureshi was explaining in his book, because I've seen this, I've seen my parents go through it, I've seen my communities go through it. So that book helped me, rocked me to the core, seeing Nabil's passion for the truth and, being separated from his family and getting isolated in this whole new place all on his own, trying to figure it out. And so when the Lord placed in this desire in my heart to try and reach to the campus youth, and that was partly because I was connected with India Campus Crusade for Christ. So we had a campus ministry going on within the campus, and this was like a campus that would not allow anything of this sort. So we needed to have students from within taking the initiative. We could not expect any staff to come from outside and reach out to us and start the meeting. So we knew that if we were to reach out to these youth, we would need to have some sort of backing. And so I just thought, maybe I can whip up some podcasts and talking, some introductory talks, because I'm a layman. I am studying these things through the books, and I'm not an expert, so I will be able to convey these topics in a simpler manner to the youth and also to my fellow Indians. So at that time, I was not thinking as a ministry. I wasn't thinking SAFT Apologetics as a ministry. I was thinking, okay, a YouTube channel and a podcast to get this started, and let's see where that goes. So I was thinking about the name and this concept of seeking truth. I felt like that is something that we can immediately draw someone's attention to, because we're not telling them to, hey, believe this right now and get baptized. We're asking them, are you willing to explore? Are you willing to keep your hearts open? Because if you're willing to seek answers, you will find the truth. And so that was at the heart, and I was like, yeah, that sounds, as an acronym, SAFT sounds cool. people might identify it with Nabil's book and would find it similar to there. And so we just thought, okay, when people hear the name SAFT, they don't have to think it's a Christian ministry going to convert people, because that's also a hostile field in India. So we can keep it without compromising anywhere. I can keep the name pretty straightforward and simple and also catchy for the youth if they would not get tap into it. So that's how the name SAFT Apologetics turned out to be. And like I said, we began with a simple podcast work about just under 2 years ago. And well, here we are with the work.
Yeah, so I learned on your website yesterday that you guys are actually heard, your podcast is actually heard across 47 countries and 6 continents, which has to be encouraging. But so when you started the podcast, now that you've started the podcast, tell us about how it's been developing. How's it going? Has it evolved at all since you've started it? What's it look like?
Yeah, so when I started it off, so if people go and look at the first podcast on YouTube, they can see the name, like the video name mentions my name and a friend of mine. So he was a Christian who just came to faith at that point. So I asked him, can you help me out to just sort of co-host the podcast? I don't want it to be like a lecture series, just wanted to be a conversation. So he just stepped in. I borrowed column mics from my friend, and I'm staying in the hostel, so I can't leave the university campus anytime I please. So I have to get prior permission, all of that. So after our class hours or during any free period that we would go to the library, find a quiet corner, plug in the column mics, and just go over these topics. So that's where it initially started. And then when he had to step out, Lord brought in Ankit Naik, who is now our executive director, into the team. And it was still the same format. We would take up simple topics, we would go over them. I would share my thoughts on it. He would engage with me in the conversation, still working out with a best space to record it with the limited equipments. And that's the point where I first came across Adobe Premiere, trying to put together video, first time going across audio processing. So I had no idea how to put together audio. I'm handling 2 different audios. I don't know what to do. I'm just doing noise cancelling and leveling. That's all I know. I don't know how to mix the audio. I don't know how to level up bass and treble or anything. So it was very shabby in that sense, because technically it was not exactly pleasing. Even people looking back would say, we could have done the speaker better and all. So the whole point was, okay, this is what we have. Let's go forward with what we have. We can better the content that we're going to speak on. So we began in that format, and then at one point we asked ourselves, what if we bring some guests on? What if we just reach out to some of the guests and email them? There's no harm in emailing. So we thought, okay, let's start emailing, and so we started sending out emails left and right, because emails don't cost us a penny. So we're like, hey, let's see, if the Lord opens the way, blessed be the name of the Lord. So we just started sending emails, and one email that I sent out to was a Christian magazine. Now they're still with us, they're still supporting us, but they would want to be identified as a well-wisher and not their ministry name to be publicly revealed. So they're a Christian ministry, and I had heard about them a long time back. So I just dug up their name, sent them an email, said, hey, we are a Christian podcast. We were just hoping if you would be kind enough to feature our name in the magazine and sort of introduce your audience to our work, some sort of a publicity. We don't know where that would lead us. We also don't know what's the normal protocol with any of that. We sent an email, and then I hear back from the founder himself. So as it turns out, the founder and the team members are all from India, and he's super excited to see this. And later I get to know that the ministry and the magazine is like big deal. They're very, very well known. They're quite influential. They've been doing this for a long time. So he reaches out, his team reaches out, and they sort of, with that simple act of saying, hey, we love your work, we would like to support you. It was a huge encouragement for us. And we were like, wow, this is turning out to be good. And then I started getting a response from the speaker emails, and was like, Brian Orton said yes. I was like, oh man, Brian Orton said yes. He's our first guest. Then Greg Cockle says yes. Then Sean McDowell said yes. Then William Lane Craig said yes. And all of these speakers just started saying yes to come on our podcast. And we were like, wow, this is unbelievable. I mean, this definitely has to be the Lord's and for everything to fall into place at the right time. And we began to bring guests on. And looking back now, we've had 45 episodes, well over 20 guests. Some of the leading speakers covering some major topics. We've recently been featuring some of the renowned women apologists in the field, and we have expanded our technical side. We just inducted a video editor new to the team. We've been having an audio processor who's been a brilliant in the field, brilliant friend of mine who's been handling the audio. So we've got hold of mics. We moved from Skype to Zoom, and we're getting video podcasts out there. We have a creative director on the team. So our entire work has been enhancing very quickly over the last 6-7 months, 1 year span. So we have seen some great progress from back when sitting and finding a corner in the library with 2 column mics, figuring out what to talk on, to having a proper schedule, team working, delegating tasks, and so it's been a tremendous journey, and we're looking forward to see what more the Lord has in store for us.
Well, that's phenomenal. It's great and encouraging to see the progress of that. I'm just thinking about, as you have these different guests on, and what kind of questions you're asking them. And I'm kind of thinking, well, there might be certain cultural differences that I'm certain I'm not aware of. Like, say, the spiritual cultural climate is different in India or that part of the world. So have you noticed different apologetic questions that you come across, more so that maybe you would see maybe the U.S. is handling certain sort of questions, but you're like, no, we're handling these sorts of questions, or do you see a lot of the same sorts of issues where you're at?
Yeah, so it's there isn't an easy answer to that, and the reason is because of the globalization that's happening. A lot of cultural linguistic barriers are breaking down, and when speaking about in this context of religions and all of that, what we're seeing in India is the Indian audience is not unfamiliar to the common questions on existence of God that we would normally handle with the American audience or the Western audience. And that is because majority of Indians speak English, and there are people who are willing to translate atheistic books and their contents into Indian languages. There are like numerous, countless people ready to do that. So as a result, questions that we would normally find, what we would normally expect to find in the Western Hemisphere is also quite prevalent in India. But maybe if I were to pin down and ask, okay, what exactly are questions that you would expect an Indian to immediately ask, but maybe not someone from the Western Hemisphere, it would be the direct notion that religions are mere fiction. And the reason is not because you can only expect an Indian to say that, but because they see themselves. They see specifically in the Hinduistic system about having 36 crore gods. Now, that would be crore. I could say it's 3.6 billion gods. That's the Western figure. 3.6 billion gods, different forms of rituals, like plain, to them it's absolutely meaningless rituals. There is no content to it. Blindly doing stuff. So for them, the force of the question, religion is man-made, is very much powerful than for someone who has been in the Western Hemisphere, who's been seeing Christianity, do so many charity works and changing people's life and sort of impacting the surroundings. So for an Indian, the force of the question is much more powerful because he's not seeing a temple do that sort of life-changing humanitarian work. It's merely you go there, you do your stuff, and you go back home. So that would be from my limited experience, what I would point out as something unique to the Indian audience to ask. But then again, like you said, the barriers are breaking down. Questions that you would see asked for the Western audience through YouTube articles are now easily penetrating into the Indian mind. So sooner we may not even have to talk about this sort of cultural difference when talking about the peripheral questions that people may ask.
Mm-hmm. Just to follow up on that, Jacob, sometimes in the West, in the United States, we tend to have this mindset of naturalism quite prevalent. And so spiritual warfare, or the idea of demonic influences, or any sort of spiritism, or the supernatural as just a broad category, is kind of not as prevalent when it comes to persuading people about Christianity. You might have to come up against naturalism and that sort of a thing. And even in the church, there might be a downplaying of the supernatural aspect of things, or the movement of the spirit, or that sort of thing. So I'm just wondering, because seems like every American missionary story I hear is always like, oh, you go overseas and you'll see demons manifesting, and you'll see a lot of supernatural stuff like that. So I'm just curious. I mean, because I have gone and done missions overseas and lived in Malaysia for a time, and I do see differences in that regard, but I've not been to India, and I don't know how prevalent naturalism is, or if it's more, people are more supernaturally minded, is there a certain prevalence one way or another?
Yeah. So I get what you're asking, and like, while you were framing that question, I just ran an image scan in my mind about looking. I just went through what position my friends from college and from my friends from school would hold, and looking back at it, I think I would have to really scrutinize them to find someone who is like properly holding on to a supernatural view, like any supernatural view. Looking back at them, I find that the majority holds on to atheism, like straight up. Maybe they don't know atheism per se, but they would say God, demons, ghosts, all of that stuff, man-made creations. They would easily affirm that.
I don't believe in any of those things.
Well, that's all right. I don't either.
So, but again, that's I'm talking about people who understand English, who would watch movies, documentaries, and all of stuff. So maybe that could be the major influencing factor for them to develop that thought. But in India, I mean, like you said, these sort of manifestations are not rare. These are pretty prevalent because definitely in the Christian standpoint, we see the dichotomy, either for God or against God. And so all the views that are against God come in direct influence of satanic manifestations. So from my experience itself, from experience of my parents, the pastors that we know, these sort of manifestations are common, but maybe these are common to us because these pastors directly deal with that sort of an audience. But maybe if I were to reach out to my friends and ask, hey, have you had any sort of these supernatural experience? They might say, no, I haven't had any. These are mere human creations, myths that people try to tell. These are psychological experience that people have. So that, again, it's coming back to the point that I said earlier. It's sort of this changing and shift in what people perceive and how Western thought is quickly permeating the Indian cultural thought fabric. So I guess I answered your question.
Yeah.
I hope so.
And if I might throw another follow-up, from your perspective, what might be easier to deal with? I mean, and what I mean by that is, on one hand, if you're in an environment where spiritualism or spirituality is accepted, then it's just a matter of maybe just saying, well, here's the one true God, and he has the true power, and there's truth behind it, and at least they're already open to the supernatural. Whereas naturalism, you've got to overcome that some other way, and obviously you found it apologetics and the rational defense of the faith to be maybe a key in that part of evangelism. So is naturalism a harder nut to crack in that regard?
Well, I think given the Indian context, the fact that we tend to be more emotion driven, and I'm not saying that Indians don't think. I mean, we have Indians running up as the head of US corporations, so it's definitely a blunder to say that Indians don't think, but we have a tendency to be driven more by emotions. Our media, our culture, our movies, all are mass reflections of that. So I think for an Indian who thinks that there is something supernatural, who thinks and says maybe there is a God beyond it, for a person of that sort, from the experience that I would say that about the conversion that normally take place in India, it would be easy to reach out to them because they're open to the idea of a supernatural. They may have some experience of something happening, and they may have an emotional connection to it. And again, this is coming from the experience of what I've seen evangelists and pastors who have talked about it. For a person who's open to that, when they get an emotionally charged experience, they're much more open to explore that field and ask, maybe there is someone behind it all, than to deal with someone, an Indian who holds on to naturalism.
It's interesting because, I obviously have no way of knowing and completely trust what you're saying, but my experience over here in the States is that sometimes, now again, this is a case by case basis, but I'm speaking, sometimes it's easier for me to have discussions with somebody who does hold kind of more of a view that we would say is consistent with naturalism than somebody who has the background in religious thought. And the reason is something you hinted at, is that people who, not everyone, obviously, but there are a lot of people in the States that have kind of a buffet Christianity or a buffet theism, maybe, or a buffet religion, in the sense that they kind of just come to the buffet and take the parts that they like, and they create their own kind of religion. And a lot of times it's based on their feelings. So if I'm coming to a naturalist, they're going to usually, in my experience here, they're going to be a little more interested in something like a cosmological argument or, historical arguments for the resurrection, because they kind of value evidence. In a lot of cases, not every case, because they can be as dogmatic as religious people too. I know that. Whereas when I come to that religious person who has that buffet kind of religion that they've created themselves, it's all based on feelings. So it's almost like sometimes kind of like trying to nail Jello to the wall when you're talking with them. You know what I'm saying? Because anything you throw at them, they can kind of fall back to, that just doesn't feel right to me. Or that's not been my experience, So it's interesting to hear the difference there versus here. You know what I mean?
So I guess I would like to qualify my answer to saying that in India, we have 29 different states. Way less than in the US. But each states have their own subsections of culture, language, styles of language, belief systems. So we may think that, Indians predominantly believe in Hinduism. But if you go to Northeast, each state has their own different form of tribal religion. So that doesn't come under Hinduism. That comes under their own specific religious sect, other than Buddhism, Jainism, and any of that. From my experience, we can't put together the Indian audience under one bracket and say, we have the same cultural flow. And there is a particular pattern, but it is very nuanced. So if you were to go to North India and you were to go to a village area and you were to travel with Christians who minister in that region, for them to cement them in their faith, for them to get charged in the spirit and to say, yes, I am willing to die for Christ, all you need to say is that Jesus lives and Jesus loves you. Just saying that gets them deeply rooted in the faith much more than a Bible study would do. Because for them, they are driven by emotion. And when I say they're driven by emotion and charged in faith, I'm not saying that they're just going to blindly do anything. We're talking about people who are willing to reach out to the unreached and even face death in the face, people who are getting persecuted on a daily basis. There are numerous Christian ministries in India that document it. People who are willing to stand in the face of persecution and say, hey, I'm not going to file a police case against you because I care about you. But even if you come and burn down my house, my church, and beat me, I'm still going to preach the gospel. For those people, it's not really apologetics or doctrinal theology that gets them going. It's just knowing the fact that Jesus lives and Jesus loves you. And people who have gone on mission trips from my state, from my church, would say that for them, that's all they need. But for us in the South, in the churches, we won't be happy with the pastor coming in and saying, Jesus loves, Jesus lives. Our thought would be like, yeah, we know that. That's there in the Bible. But get more into the topic, get more into what's happening behind, get more what Paul is trying to say. And that difference distinctly comes just when you jump between two parts of India, just the northern part and the southern part. So India is very diverse in that sense. And I was predominantly speaking about that sort of majority who are open to this spiritual experience that they've already had, and these are people who may have been tormented by demonic possessions, and they will be like, I've been going to these temple after temple. And that's a predominant view among spiritual Indians who would say that, I pray to all gods. Why? Because I just want to find a solution. So if you were to get into a rickshaw or tuk-tuk, as people might call it, auto rickshaw is the proper name. It's not a tuk-tuk people. So if you were to get into a rickshaw, and you would see them having pictures of different gods. And they're not like, I've thought about it and pluralism makes much more sense. It's simply saying, I just want some God to answer me. I just want someone to deal with me. And you would see this. I've lost count of how many times even movies show this. They would be showing this very devout man, and in his puja room where he sets up all the deities, you would see Jesus, the symbol for Allah, and one of the Hindu deities. So that sort of drive is more driven by emotion, not by the concept of, I think these fundamental doctrines of all of these religions come together. It's not that thought that makes them to think pluralism. It's a thought of saying, I just need some God to help me. Gods, no God, I don't care. I need someone to solve me out of this. And for that sort of person, when we share the gospel, it's often that when these evangelists share, for those sort of individuals, you don't need to get into apologetics. As Dr. Craig might point out, that inner witness of the Holy Spirit gets the job done. So it's that sort of an audience that is a majority. But as the generation is changing, we're looking at the Gen Z that is taking over, very open to Western ideas. For them, secularism and naturalism would be a predominant view. So it's very complex to answer for the entire Indian audience. I guess at least I can put that across. It's very complex to answer for the entire Indian audience. But naturalism is on the rise. I can definitely vouch for that. We have atheist conferences happening in India. And these are conferences that are happening in the local language. There are atheist groups who have cosmologists within their lineup ready to translate cosmological responses to the theistic arguments in the local language. So they are coming out with all guns blazing, and they are very easily able to tap into a very young audience doing TEDx talks at colleges and other places. So that shift is coming very soon. We'll be soon looking at an India more open to the idea of naturalism than pluralism.
Well, and I think you're wise there too, to mention that, and I don't mean to do that either, to paint with a broad brush, because I'm just speaking for like my area, but I'm sure in the United States there would be different pockets that people, Christians, would say, oh, that's not really my experience. I usually run into this. So I think it's a great point that you make, that, you know, there are different views and different ways people approach these kind of topics depending on the area. So I think that's a good word of caution to bring up. So thank you. That was actually super helpful and very interesting.
A follow-up question on the atheism that you see that is looking like it's on the rise in India. Would you call it more of a militant type of atheism? Is it emotion? Does it seem to you to be driven from emotion in that sense, or I don't know, is it Dawkins style emotional rationalism, or what do we see? How would you describe it?
Yeah, so I've been having some direct interaction with an atheist group, and they are based in my state in Kerala, so they're dealing with our language. They are absolutely driven by Richard Dawkins style, and so I've been running across some of these young people who are on, they're doing these through their personal accounts. They're not part of any atheist group or anything, but even them are driven by Jesus mythicist level, Richard Dawkins level, anti-theistic view. So what they're doing is, so Richard Dawkins' book God Delusion, it was translated into our language 10 years ago and published here. And the person who did the translation is leading a major atheistic platform here, and they are well decked out. I mean, these guys are well financed. They're holding atheistic conferences with people coming in from across the world to speak at these conferences. I've lost track of how many Facebook pages and YouTube channels they have to continuously flesh out content, do rebuttal videos, speak at TEDx talks. So this is just happening within one state, one language. And we have 29 states and more than thousands of languages, and even more without transcripts. So definitely atheism is on the rise, and atheism that I would say would make people like Graham Opie really reconsider atheism. That sort of militant, superficial level. Jesus was copied, the pagan myths, that sort of very superfluous sort of atheism, but definitely militant, anti-theistic, and sort of a street epistemology sort of level atheism.
Let me offer you some hope. I don't know if this will, at least I've seen here in the States, other than on the internet and actual scholarly, thoughtful atheist circles, most people, as you probably know, are even beginning to denounce what was known as the new atheism. Yeah. And so hopefully, you'll see that same kind of trend with that group going down the road. But one of the things you mentioned an atheist conference. There's atheist conference happening in India. But I tell you, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'm sure all of us do. And I listen to your podcast, SAFT Apologetics. I listened to your 45th podcast about this conference you guys put on. And I'll be honest, it is very rare that I get done listening to a podcast and I am pumped and encouraged. And that is what happened after I listened to this just short little 30-minute podcast. And so I would love for you to tell us and your listeners about this conference that you did, and how God moved in the planning and the actual conference and just everything he orchestrated there.
Yeah, so well over about, I can say June, July, I just shared with my friends, hey, with the teammates, we have all these connections with us, and we're all under lockdown, so it's definitely an online platform. Why don't we put together something like a conference? So we've got the handle of logistics and getting guests on, working out the timings. So why don't we do something like we get some speakers on to come and do a podcast in India, on the online platform? And they were like, yeah, let's give it a thought. And so in August, when we had our team podcast on, we just hinted at saying there's something in the works. And so we just brought up this idea. Why don't we bring together some leading speakers to speak to the general Indian audience, and maybe get a speaker to speak specifically to Indian apologists, maybe on the final day or something of that sort. And you know what? Let's throw in some Indian worship leaders in there, because to our knowledge, that was never done before, getting world-class Indian apologetic speakers with Indian worship bands. So we just had this idea in our mind, and I knew that being a regional faith chapter director, I can reach out to Dr. Craig's availability. And since we had Frank Turek and all on the podcast, we were like, yeah, we can definitely reach out to them and see they already know us. And I had even brought Frank Turek in for our college campus online Zoom meeting. So I was pretty connected with his correspondent. So we had this idea and we ran it by a couple of our pastors that we knew in India. And so they're like, these guys are quite influential. They've got great connections. And they were like so pumped up. They said, you guys go ahead. You have our full backing. So one of the pastors is connected with Hillsong Church. So his church represents Hillsong in India. So directly connected with Brian Houston. So a pretty influential voice. And so we were like, yeah, this is amazing. I mean, these pastors trust us. They were like, you go ahead. You have our backing. We were like, all right, let's jump in. And so we put together planning. Brian was there to help me and walk through it and figure out the guest list and all of that. So even more encouragement for us to see. And so we reached out. We got Frank Turek, Fazal Rana, Tom Gilson, and even Dr. William Lane Craig all ready to come in for the conference. And through my friends, we were able to bring in 4 of India's leading Christian worship bands. So these are like the Chris Tomlins of Indian worship sphere. And we were like, man, this is going to be epic, because these are world's leading apologists coming together to share stage with India's leading Christian bands, which has never been done before. And the entire team that is working behind this is a 3-member team, aged between 20 and 23, having no experience of even being part of a conference hosting team, even being part of the technicals of what this is. So we were like, okay, let's go with it. We have Zoom, we'll get a Zoom paid account, we'll stream into YouTube. We were not happy with it. We were like, but that's what we'll do. We have limited resources. Let's go with it. And so we begin poster works, putting the word out. And just before we were to release the main poster announcing that this is the conference, these are speakers, just before that, I was on a podcast interview with one of the regional faith chapter directors. So he was interviewing me. We finished up the interview and he was like, hey, if you guys, I see your work. If you at some point were to do a conference, do let me know. I have some softwares that I can tap you into. I was like, what?
And he had no idea, right?
He had no idea.
You guys were,
Nothing.
yeah.
We kept it very secret. We were just hinting at something is coming up. That's the only hint that we gave in our social media also. And I don't think he was even tapping into social media. So I said, yeah, definitely. Show me what you've got. And he said that he has this full-on access to one of the world's top conference online platform, which we came to know that now the Indian government also started using it for their conferences. So we were like, what, man? Wow. This is top class. This platform is brand new to India. This is world-class level. We are having world-class speakers, world-class setup. Hey, let's go all in. And so he gave us access. We immediately transitioned. We were so happy. Our creative director was super happy because he's this tech wizard guy and he was not at all happy with Zoom, YouTube setup. He wanted to do something properly. And so we set that up there. The platform was smooth. We had a 4-day conference. Frank Turek, Fazran, and Tom Gilson. And Tom Gilson, indeed, he presented what he believes is a brand new argument for the resurrection. And so we are excited to see what that will turn out, because you guys might recall his book, Too Good to Be False. It just started out as a simple thought in his mind and turned out to be this brilliant book. So the argument that he presented for the resurrection, started out as a simple thought. He jotted down then some points, and we hope that will turn out to be a better argument, a brand new argument for the resurrection. And then the final day, we had Dr. William Lane Craig himself. And I think the last time Dr. Craig addressed an Indian audience was when he came to Hyderabad in India. And that was like close to 20 years ago. And so this was a great deal for us. And we had a select delegate of Indian apologists, evangelists, pastors, leaders. We brought them all in, and we did a specific Q&A on apologetics and evangelism. And the audience got to ask their questions on specific questions addressing what to do with India, how to engage with philosophy with the churches, how to deal with churches, how to bring apologetics and merge them together with evangelism. So not only was it an opportunity for us to reach over 700 plus registrations that skyrocketed towards the end, but also we were so happy that we were able to bring these young apologists who were like big fans of Dr. Craig's work. They were very happy to sit in on a Zoom call with Dr. Craig, and we were happy to see that we were able to impact them. And so that was our conference, Areopagus 2021. And so it's been a great success, and we're looking forward to Areopagus 2022 as well, and keep brainstorming some plans in our mind. So I just gave a brief overview. There was even more places where the Lord stepped into the scene, but this was phenomenal in all ways. And we came to know that later from other apologists that this very well could be India's first international apologetics conference. We had no idea that this was the level that the conference was shooting for. We just stayed humble and said, whatever be it, we're going to do it properly. But this was what the Lord was leading us to. And we were very happy and grateful to look back at it and say, blessed be the name of the Lord.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like, as I listened to the podcast, as you guys continue to lay it out, it kind of starts out with these guys who, I mean, you guys admittedly were like, we didn't know what we were doing. This is just something we wanted to do. You had this prayer team of 7 to 8 members who were just continually, bathing this thing in prayer. Then this guy comes along and just is like, hey, if you guys ever want to do a conference, and it just happens to be this major platform. None of the speakers, I mean, we're talking about Gilson, Fuzrana, Turek, WLC, all these guys. I say WLC like I know him, but you know what I mean. None of these guys took an honorarium, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
I mean, just you guys, the more you talk, the more I was just like, wow, what the Lord can still do with just a bunch of humble, a small group of humble guys who come together and just say, Lord, we want to do this. And then, of course, to cap it all off with what you just said, this idea that nothing like this had ever been done in India, so it was just a real pleasure to listen to it and just, praise the Lord for how he worked through you guys.
Well, that was really encouraging. Jacob, we're coming towards the end of the podcast. So tell us a little bit about any future goals or the vision you have for SAFT regarding your team. I think you might be looking for some volunteers to fill some roles. Could you share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so we're looking to expand some of our work because we want to put out some sort of response videos specifically addressing objections that we see among Indian influential people. So there are Indian gurus who are putting out gross misrepresentation of the gospel, and people are just lapping it up. And there are also Indian youth who are standing out to be like, hey, we are swimming against the tide. We are breaking patriarchy, and we are also breaking religion with it. Join us. So we want to put out some Christian responses to it and reach the Indian youth specifically. So we want to expand our video work. And so for that, since we are looking forward to have some volunteer team members join us as video editors and graphic designers. We've had 2 people sign up already, and we're looking to expand that even more as much as the openings come up, because that is going to deeply expand our work. And also we've been having some great speaking opportunities also come up. So just recently I recorded a 4-part lecture series in Malayalam for a Christian TV channel, and that was on Introduction to Philosophy versus Science, Kalam, Moral Argument, Fine-Tuning Argument. So that tied deeply into our vision, because it's a great deal of work to translate these arguments with their wordings, maintaining the essence and the nature of the argument while making sure that the people understand it. Because it's a great deal of work to translate philosophical arguments into Malayalam when our language itself is not exactly developed to deal with these philosophical terminology. I mean, spontaneous fluctuation. I didn't know that there was a word for spontaneous fluctuation in subatomic vacuum for the Malayalam language. So it's a great deal of a challenging task, but we are happy and grateful to see opportunities open up and engage and deal with the common Indian audience, the very audience whom the atheistic teams are able to reach in the Malayalam language. That's where the battle really is. It's no longer in the English language, within our native languages. That's where they're taking the battle, and we need to take the battle there as well. And so that is where the vision of SAFT is. It is to make apologetics contents palatable across languages in India. It's a huge vision. It's massive. But if there's one thing that from our experience that we know is that the Lord He is the one who picks up the weight. He's the one who picks up the burden. We just need to be there to be humbly submitting ourselves into His hands. And so that's the vision that the Lord has placed on our ministry, to breach language barriers with the apologetics content and equipping the church in the Indian audience. And So the Lord is leading us towards it. And just to touch a bit on what we have coming up, we are working and praying to start a podcast series on natural theology. So 2 young guys, college level, discussing arguments for God. So we want that content to reach even more college youth, casually going over arguments for God from the perspective of what we would normally ask questions, from the perspective of what we would normally answer. So we're looking forward to that series coming up. And we have some more, we have our conference coming up, God willing, next year. And just to close off, apologetics is turning out to be blooming in India. There are now numerous Christian apologetics ministries that are steadily growing. There is Gloria Apologetics, the Carpenter's Desk. I just came to know about a new ministry called Biblical Demand. There's a massive ministry called SAFT Apologetics who have already breached our multiple languages in India. So apologetics is turning out to be on the force in India. We just hope and pray that the churches in India would too stand by us as they've stood by with evangelists and missionaries in India, that they too would see the value of the work we are doing and would help us grow into the work and help all the ministries that are there working alongside us in reaching India for the gospel. So I hope that if anyone tunes into this podcast from India, cheer up. The Lord is moving powerfully through the field of apologetics in India, and you have numerous ministries that you can stand by and support and help expand the reach of the gospel.
Awesome. For those who are listening who are interested in finding more resources, I want to point you to the SAFT Apologetics podcast on various platforms. We'll link to that in the show notes. I want to encourage you that if you are listening out there and you're like, man, I'd love to see that grow more, well, you can support it. Now, Jacob didn't ask me to do this, but I want to point you over to their Patreon account as well. We'll link to that. Give these guys your support. They're doing great work, and I'm thrilled to have a small voice into their ministry and to see how it's growing and making an impact. And you can help do that too by supporting them, listening to their podcast, sharing their resources, and subscribing and all of that good stuff. Jacob, where would you like to point people online? Where's your website? Where can they find you on social media, etc.?
Yeah, they can just search for SAFT Apologetics, and you can find our website at saftapologetics.com. We go by the same name on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And our podcast, SAFT Podcast, is available on all major directories, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, you name it, we are there. So we are easily within reach on the internet platform.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jacob, for joining us. I can't wait to see what's coming up soon from you guys in this coming year.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yep. And thank you so much to be with Brian and Chad. It's a pleasure talking with you guys, and also to be once again with Brian to talk and be in this conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you have a question you'd like us to address or just a message for us, feedback, good or bad, you can either email us at podcast@apologetics315.com or leave a voice message for us using SpeakPipe. Just go to speakpipe.com/apologetics315 to leave us a message. And remember, if you include a Ghostbusters quote in your question, we guarantee that we'll read it on the podcast. We also ensure up to 50% better quality answers. Also, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review in iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. And please share this episode with a friend if you found it useful. Remember, you can find lots of apologetics resources at apologetics315.com, along with show notes for today's episode. Find Chad's apologetic stuff over at Truthbomb Apologetics. That's truthbomb.blogspot.com. This has been Brian Otten and Chad Gross for the Apologetics 315 podcast, and thanks for listening.
Listen to some good old-fashioned country. And when you do, cook up the best sausage in the country. Eckrich smoked sausage. Naturally hardwood smoked and crafted with just the right blend of spices. Perfect for lunch, dinner, or even right now. Eckrich. You do you.
There's never been a better time to switch to Spectrum Mobile. You could save hundreds of dollars on your mobile bill. Plus, there are no added taxes, hidden fees, and no contracts, all on the most reliable service. Click to try the Spectrum Mobile Savings Calculator. In 3 easy steps, you'll see how much you could save with Spectrum Mobile. Visit spectrummobile.com/save today. Spectrum Internet required. Savings may vary. Restrictions apply. Visit spectrummobile.com/save for details.